kicking things off in this session is a session on increasing momentum for zero emissions shipping. So we're going to be talking about the shipping industry and how it fits into the sustainable ocean economy. And I'm joined here on stage by 4 brilliant speakers from across the industry and really from across the world. You have their full bios online, so I will just do brief introductions. We are joined by Alison Brown, the Chief Executive of the High Ambition Climate Collective, by Johanna Christensen from the Global Maritime Forum, Tatsuro Watanabe from Mitsui O.S.K. Lines, and by you, Roberto Aonuma, from Japan Hydro. So thank you all again for joining us. We have about 35 minutes on the clock, and we'd like to leave time for questions, so please keep your remarks succinct. I'd like to kick things off by maybe just going down the line, if we can, and to hear your thoughts in light of the conversation we heard on stage this morning, thinking about ocean systems. From your perspective in the shipping industry, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing zero emissions? Is it a practical challenge? Is it a financial challenge? Is it a regulatory challenge? Where do you see the biggest obstacles? And then maybe we can get into some of the solutions. Why don't you kick it off for us, since you've taken the seat next to me?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. I'm Alison, and yeah, I don't think it's any of these challenges. I think it's more of an alignment challenge between all of these things. So having an alignment between the regulation, the technology, the finance, the stakeholders, whether that's policymakers, industry, community, having greater alignment, and there's just not enough of that right now. And that also implies within each of these sectors, the policy alignment between what's happening on the international level and then what's happening in each region, nation, subnational action. And having greater alignment would be helpful in getting us from this state of ambition into action.
Brilliant. And how about you? Do you see it as an alignment problem? Where do you see the challenges emerging?
Well, certainly the alignment and collaboration is a big part of what needs to happen now. Nevertheless, I do think I would highlight policy as a key area that we can proactively address at this stage. We're at a critical juncture in regulating shipping's climate emissions, and key decisions will be made actually this year at the International Maritime Organization. So that's a window of opportunity that we should not let pass, because really the outcome of those discussions and those negotiations will play a huge role in whether shipping will be incentivized to make the transition to zero-emission solutions or not, and at what cost and at what timescale, like what speed, right? So the direction of the transition has been set by the IMO already, but whether it will be a smooth, least costly transition or a very messy, costly transition is going to be determined largely by the decisions that are made this year.
Brilliant. So it's a big year. So we have an alignment challenge to solve, a policy challenge to solve. Watanabe-san, from your perspective.
To materialize the zero emission, the international shipping by 2050, it is necessary to convert our vessels fuel from conventional bunker fuel to the green new fuel like ammonia. But so far as of today, we are not successful to place our the offtake commitment to make the suppliers project the feasible and bankable. We should not only invest in the new green vessel fuels and its infrastructure, but also try to develop the mechanism to share the huge additional costs across the entire society. So we see high alternative fuel prices as the biggest challenge. For example, clean ammonia is expected to cost about 4 to 6 times as much as conventional fuel, even by 2030. So this is too much for the maritime industry to handle on its own. So I believe the entire society, all beneficiaries of the seaborne transportation, should bear the additional costs broadly and thinly in order to break the deadlocked situation we are facing.
So costs, another big challenge to add to the picture.
Yeah.
Aonuma-san, from your perspective, how do you see the challenges?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Roberto from Japan Hydro. I would like to highlight 2 points. One is the availability of the alternative fuel. Well, what Robertson mentioned, it is expensive. Yes, it's true, but before price, the volume is a big issue today. Actually, our company is running a small passenger ferry in Japan, which is run by the hydrogen. But sometime last year and a couple of years, we have occasion to operate that boat in Tokyo Bay here. And we need to buy hydrogen from Kyushu Island. It's, let's say, west end of Japan, more than 1,000 kilometers away. And that is still gray hydrogen. So nothing green at all. This is point number one. Point number two is, let's say, time constraint. Shipping is, let's say, long-term business, which means, if you want to place the new building order in Japanese shipyard today to receive brand new ship, earliest delivery timing is already 2028. And the usual life cycle of a ship is 15 years or even longer. So which means, that if you comply with, the target, probably today is not too early. These 2 points are my point.
So looking at this picture, I mean, what are the tools, the policy tools, the standards, the tax or levy incentives that can be utilized to try and drive this adoption at scale and at speed? What do you see as sort of the toolkit on offer for policymakers, for industry? Go for it, Johanna. Thank you.
Well, all of the above, actually.
Yeah.
So
we've got to use everything we have.
yeah, we basically need to throw everything at the wall,
Yeah.
effectively. And so that does mean that some of the policies that are under discussion at the IMO at the moment is, for example, a global fuel standard. It needs to be stringent enough that it actually incentivizes the use of zero-emission fuels. And it also needs to be stringent enough that it incentivizes the zero-emission fuels that will be scalable in the long run. So not just those that we can use in a transition phase, such as biofuels, but those that will be scalable to the need that the shipping industry faces in the long run. And to that end, one of the things that we've seen in our analysis and the work that we've done with first movers is that the key role of a levy, because it's an opportunity not only to close the cost gap, as you discussed, between the conventional fuels and the zero-emission fuels, but it's also an opportunity to raise revenue to help support first movers who are actually using the fuel. So you can have sort of a double whammy, if you will. And it is also an opportunity to raise revenue to support a just and equitable transition. So providing support to countries that will face a harder time in this transition due to the increased cost of ocean-borne transport. And I think even more so than more spaghetti that needs to be thrown at the wall. I don't know if that's not the right metaphor, but more that we need to throw at the wall is actually outside of the scope of the IMO at a national level and regional level, direct support in the early stages of the transition, to the point that that Uma-san made just before, that the lag time between projects, the investment into the production of the fuels and when they will actually come online and start delivering is anywhere between 5 to 8 years, maybe. And any measures adopted at the IMO will only go into effect in a few years. So that pushes things further and further back. So one of the things that we're advocating for is directly with national governments, with EU and other entities that can provide direct financial support in the early stages of the transition, so that we can unlock investments, private sector investments into fuels, fuel production and offtake from the private sector, again, from the shipping companies, and make sure that we get the scale, the learnings in the early stages of the transition, make sure that we know what we're doing as and when the IMO policies go into effect.
Right. Watanabe-san, I saw you nodding vigorously when the talk turned to standards. How do you see it from a shipping industry point of view?
Thank you. So we MOL joined the framework of Global Maritime Forum led by Joanna in October 2021. And after that, I discussed on this agenda together with Joanna more than 100 times. No exaggeration, so believe me. So if I add something on the Joanna's comment regarding the IMO, we anticipate that the new policy sets by the IMO will take a key role as a significant catalyst, kind of to break up this the chicken and egg the situation. So if carbon pricing agreed in IMO's discussion, and the price is predictable and enough to close the gap, the green premium, the price gap between the conventional fuel and green fuel in our case, then the shipping industry can accelerate our investment. But however, when I attended the climate COP in Baku, some guys outside of our industry asked me, why you are happy with the carbon tax or carbon levy on your business? So my answer is definitely no. So if our customers or the customer's customer or entire human society as a beneficiary of seaborne transportation is not ready to pay additional money for covering the gap, and simply rising fuel cost just by carbon pricing will not be sustainable for our industry's business. So we hope that the revenue from carbon pricing can be used to help fast movers that will be investing it for greener shipping in the future.
What do you see as sort of what needs to be done to get the demand and supply signals to align, to get people to incentivized in a way that meets these emissions targets? I mean, if it's not a carbon tax, if it's not a blanket industry-wide carbon tax, where are there spaces to change those supply-demand signals to make the equation line up in a different way?
Yeah, I think you need the policy, of course. The policy is important. That's the global framework, right?
Yeah.
The reason shipping emissions have evaded reduction targets for this long is because there was no global target for them. So we need that policy. But I think you also have to have the market certainty being developed, right? You have to get investors behind the production of these fuels, and that requires having enough demand for these fuels. I think we have a lot of that in the industry so far with a lot of the first mover initiatives like the Green Shipping Corridors, the Zero-Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance, which is a demand aggregation tender for purchasing fuels for maritime use. And so these types of initiatives are really critical for getting that initial kind of demand on the books. I think beyond that, you have to ensure, as Johannes said, that there are other incentives to get who may be the second, the third movers to be putting their demand on the book. So we need, more than just the most ambitious shippers out there to make these commitments, and that comes from the push of the policy, right? So you have to have the push and the pull at the same time, and it really doesn't work unless you have both.
Yeah. I'm curious, sort of here in Japan. I mean, you're working to make this a reality on a day-to-day basis. How do you see these alignments or misalignments? I mean, where do you see space to get market incentives to line up with the larger sustainability goals?
Well, this is again typical, chicken and egg situation. But I must say, demand comes first before the supply. In that sense, our mission is to deliver a sizable hydrogen demand in this market. Technology is already available, but in shipping business, normally shipping asset, individual investors is willing to make his money on into the shipping asset. But today, alternative fuel shipping asset is nothing attractive in view of investment. This is because lower return than any others. Much better to invest into the land property likewise. So I would like to say probably the policy to push investors to make money on into the alternative fuel asset, shipping asset, such as tax incentive, or maybe the bank interest supplementary fund kind of system to increase the return of such investment.
So we've talked a lot about shipping companies, shipping industry, but I'm curious about other sort of actors in the ecosystem. I mean, take ports, for example. Do you see a role for ports in this picture? Are there other places within the sort of shipping supply chain, as it were, that pressure or pressure can be applied and progress can be made?
Yeah. Happy to jump in. The work that we do at High Ambition Climate Collective, we focus primarily on climate action in ports. And ports play a huge role in the energy transition broadly, and particularly when it comes to providing the fuels that are traded within ports, that are used by all the different types of transport that move through ports. It's not just maritime, but there's rail, there's trucks, there's all the cargo handling equipment needs fuel or electricity. And so ports have a huge role to play in helping establish the infrastructure that's needed for these fuels. There's no way to achieve a zero-emission maritime future without ports. It's ports is where bunkering happens. It's where we have shore power for vessels that are equipped to run on shore power when they're at berth. So it's really critical that ports participate in the solution and that they're proactive in developing the infrastructure, because as others have mentioned, this infrastructure takes time to scale, and ports have a huge role in making space at their port for that and ensuring that the infrastructure can fit it in the puzzle that is needed here. So.
Maybe I can add to that. I think one thing that we're seeing is that a lot of ports are indeed doing that, and ports also really take a long-term view. Their business is in planning for the long term. They're integrated into larger national or local planning cycles as well. So they typically have these plans to 2040, 2050, infrastructure development plans, industrial development plans, etc. And so that is really where this takes place, this kind of long-range view. They can also provide incentives. So they can provide early access or faster access for ships that are zero emission or low emission ships. They can provide reduced fees. So there are other ways in which they can incentivize the shipping sector to take action in this regard. But there are other stakeholders that play an important role as well. We've seen the financial sector play a big role. So we work together with a number of banks in translating the recommendations of the TCFD, so the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, into a framework for shipping. So with the metrics and the methodology, so that the banks that finance ships can actually take a portfolio view of, and be supportive of, and incentivize the introduction of lower emission shipping. Likewise, the cargo side can play an important role. You already mentioned ZEMBA, which is this initiative that brings together and aggregates demand from cargo customers on the container side, but likewise this is happening on the bulk side as well, so amongst those that are shipping iron ore and grain and cocoa beans and whatnot. So there are lots of different stakeholders that are all contributing to this and contributing to this wider sort of alignment issue, right?
Yeah, Watanabe-san.
Yeah, if I add the one point regarding the decarbonization demand or decarbonization value belong to the other industry than the international shipping. It's not the straightforward issue, because the emission from the seaborne transportation. Seaborne transportation is our scope 1 for us, the international shipping. But the emission from the seaborne transportation is belong to the scope 3 emission for other industries. So if we make the big collective demand for the green new fuel, the amount will be related to the demand of the value of the decarbonization, which must be achieved by the entire society. So our scope 1 emission is our customers' scope 3 emission. So we MOL act eagerly as a first mover of our industry in terms of decarbonization, and I try to appeal that in front of our customers or our future customers, and ask them to choose us their green partner to reduce their scope 3 emission from seaborne transportation. But the difficulty I always face in such cases is linked to the reality that their procurements related to seaborne transportation is just a tiny piece, tiny part of their entire procurement. So what I would like to emphasize here is that scope 3 emission is configured in an aggregate of many various small parts. So I'm sure any single company never be successful like myself. So we must unite in one team and keep our voice collective, also and loud and effective to outside of our circle. So international initiatives such as Global Maritime Forum will gain more importance from now on.
Yeah, if we talk about port, actually, I'm member of some committee member of some Japanese port for greening initiatives, such as named Carbon Neutral Port. So I have been actively participating the discussion in some Japanese port, and many says, of course, such zero emission equipment is very expensive, but more importantly, they said they need to make sure the equipment is available every day and easy to be maintained. In that sense, I have a big question. The new equipment, which is only operational by alternative fuel such as hydrogen is really right solution at this early stage? This is a big question for me.
And it's a question, I guess, of getting these incentives aligned, excuse me, not just at a local, national level, but throughout stakeholders, throughout the shipping industry, from customers to suppliers, from ports to shipping companies. I wonder how as you're developing policy frameworks, how you're thinking about these interactions, this alignment problem.
Yeah, I think, and it extends beyond just the maritime supply chain. So going back to ports, thinking about, we're decarbonizing all of these different modes of transportation, and everyone has needs for e-fuels or electricity. In the US in particular, we have an initiative that's developing these massive hydrogen hubs all around the country. And in the process of developing these proposals for hydrogen hubs to get funding, there was interest from the maritime sector, but they got kind of deprioritized from others that also wanted hydrogen. And so being able to have that cross-sectoral, cross-industry collaboration and alignment over, how do we decarbonize these sectors in a way that's scalable, and ensuring that we're prioritizing the use of hydrogen, which is complex and difficult to produce, for sectors that have no alternative to decarbonize. So, think of these large vessels that we can't necessarily electrify, these ocean-going vessels. We need hydrogen for them, right? And whether that's in the form of green ammonia or green hydrogen, in the long term, we have to be able to make sure that we're scaling the development and scaling the use of these fuels in the right places at the right time, so we can get as much emission reduction as quickly as possible. So going to your point about, we don't want to necessarily rely too heavily on these so-called transition fuels because they're not scalable in the long term, and that's a waste of investment, right? We're talking about stranded assets, and that's a huge risk when it comes to making those investments. So I think it's a very complicated fix that we need to think about, and it's not just creating alignment within the maritime sector, but also creating alignment across all of these modes of transportation that are decarbonizing with these fuels.
So it's a huge coordination problem at a time when, as we've discussed already today, international coordination is becoming more and more difficult, even national coordination, right? I mean, big policy swings on things like electric vehicles, energy sources, from administration to administration. Doing fine in California. I mean, Japan has a bit more policy consistency at the national level. Have you been able to leverage that, to utilize that? I mean, has policy consistency been enough?
Yeah. Policy consistency is quite essential because our vessel is always traveling all through the world. So if I talk about our company's the contribution in Japan, our company belongs to several industrial associations that support the IMO's regulation policy making. And we are making proposals as an Asian company and as a shipping company operating various types of vessels. So we always try to keep our proposal is right and proper in the context of the just and transition, just and equitable transitions. But having said that, as the part of entire shipping industry, we need globally unified standards, of course. So Europe is leading in fuel regulation, but for the shipping industry, which operates service connecting different regions, it's challenging to deal with different regulations in each region. So our vessels are always sailing all over the world. We are basically requesting all domestic policy makers to follow IMO's policy framework in order to maintain consistency of maritime regulations in all regions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a few minutes left, and I'd like to have time to open things up to the floor for questions. Please raise your hands, and someone will come around with a microphone. Yes, in the back.
Tim Smythe from the Plymouth Marine Laboratory in the United Kingdom. The title of this session is Zero-Emission Shipping. In actual fact, we're missing some of the other emissions that are important in terms of NOx. So have any of the panelists got a view on that? And I must say, congratulations in terms of dialing down the sulfur emissions as well previously. So NOx emissions.
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah.
So prior to founding HACC, I was working on a campaign that was very much focused on the air quality, the criteria pollutants that come from shipping, as well as the emissions, the GHG emissions. And it is true that the shipping industry is a large contributor to the air quality criteria pollutants in port-adjacent communities. And so it's really important that we ensure that we're doing a full scope emission reduction and not just shifting from one type of pollution to the other as we make this transition. And so I think, Johanna touched on this earlier, that, we really need to focus on the true zero solutions that are going to get us to true zero across GHG and criteria pollutants as quickly as possible. And that means, not talking about LNG. We just need to leave that in the ground where it belongs. Kind of leapfrogging over biofuels, which has its own, environmental externalities, let alone air quality criteria pollutants that come with it, and make sure that we're scaling to get to that true north of a zero-emission future with, as much green hydrogen as possible. Because I think a lot of the communities, they're most concerned about the environmental impacts to their health, and in the U.S. that's a huge problem, and that's why California has taken such an ambitious, progressive stance on reducing some of those emissions and criteria pollutants. But it has to be full scope, and we need to have something that's a globalized framework to make sure we're addressing all those emissions from, as we call it in the industry, tank to wake, right? The full life cycle emissions of those fuels.
Yeah. We had another question up here on the left. Can we have a microphone, please? Thank you.
Thank you all. Very interesting. Elspeth Probyn from the University of Sydney. I'm always amazed at how far in the background shipping is. I was at a conference the other month of physicists talking about modelling and all the rest of it, and it was held outside of Port Kembla, which is one of the biggest ports on the eastern coast of Australia. And over the 3 days, cargo ships out on the horizon did not move. Oh. And I said to it, okay, guys, how do you bring this into your calculations? And they didn't care. So how do you bring that forward to the general public?
Awareness of shipping.
Yeah.
How to make people recognize how it is we do everything we're doing up here on this stage, how it's connected to what crosses the ocean. Maybe it's a question for me as a journalist more than anything. It's our responsibility at The Economist to raise that awareness. But any thoughts from panelists on how to raise awareness?
Actually, I have exactly the same frustration with you. Remember during COVID-19 period, everybody worried about how to maintain airline network. But nobody cares about the seafarer. However, probably Mitsui OSK as well, we are struggling a lot to keep enough number of seafarers during COVID period, but nobody really worry about that at the time. Yeah, sorry, not answering to you, but just
If I can jump in on that as well, I think shipping has largely benefited from going under the radar, sailing under the radar, if you want to use that metaphor, for decades and decades. And I think we've been in the fortunate place where that has actually started to shift, where a supply chain crunch in the context of COVID and other incidents have really brought shipping more to the forefront. It also means that more people are beginning to pay attention, certainly at the policy level, whether that translates to researchers or indeed to the broader public. I don't think that awareness is quite there yet, but it's certainly beginning to sort of crawl up the ladder of awareness.
Come up, up to the surface,
exactly,
if you will.
come up to the surface, become more evident, and I think that's for the good. We need to shine more light on the impacts that the shipping sector has, but also what it is doing, because it is actually in this climate space, it has a potential really to be a front runner. It has a potential to unlock investments, trillions of dollars worth of investments into renewable electricity. So there are huge opportunities inherent in shipping's energy transition, and a really positive story as well. So we should tell that as well.
I think that's a great place for us to end this session, and I'd like you all to please give a big round of applause for our 4 wonderful speakers.